Hello everybody. In this video, we are going to talk about the muscles of the foot. The muscles of the foot can be classified into the plantar muscles as well as the dorsal muscles. Let's talk about the plantar muscles first. So the plantar muscles can be further classified into the central muscles of the foot, the lateral muscles of the foot, and the medial muscles of the foot. Let's start with the central muscles of the foot. So the first muscle that we're going to talk about is the flexor digitorum brevis. The flexor digitorum brevis will originate on the calcaneal tuberosity and the plantar aponeurosis, and it inserts onto the middle phalanx of 2 to 5 digits. So flexor digitorum brevis is going to be present on the plantar surface, and it is the most superficial central muscle as well as the largest central muscle. Next, we have the quadratus plantae. Quadratus plantae, as the name suggests, it's a quadrilateral shaped muscle. It originates on the calcaneus and it inserts on the tendon of the flexor digitorum longus. Here we were talking about the flexor digitorum brevis, but now here we are talking about the flexor digitorum longus. Longus is a leg muscle, while brevis is a feet muscle. So this inserts on the tendon of the flexor digitorum longus. Now lumbricles will continue from here. So the lumbricles will originate on the tendons of the flexor digitorum longus where the quadratus plantae ended, and they will insert on the base of the proximal phalanx of toes 2 to 5 or of digits 2 to 5. If you notice, we always leave the big toe or the hallux aside, and we do this because the hallux has its own set of muscles that help in its movement. Just like in the upper limb, the thumb had its own set of thenar muscles regulating its movement. Next, we have the plantar interossei. So we have only 3 plantar interossei. The plantar interossei will originate on the metatarsal 3 to 5 and they will insert on the proximal phalanges. If I had to draw the plantar interossei, this is the third metatarsal. They will originate on the metatarsal and insert on the proximal phalanx. Originate on the metatarsal, insert on the proximal phalanx. Similarly with the little toe. This is how the plantar interossei of the foot is oriented. Next we come to dorsal interossei. The dorsal interossei will originate on the adjacent sides of the neighboring metatarsal bones. So if we have to draw the dorsal interossei, so let's say this is one metatarsal and this is the other metatarsal. They have two heads. One will originate on this side of the metatarsal, the other one will originate from here, and they will insert onto the proximal phalanx. If you notice, they are all inserting towards the second digit of the leg. Next, we'll talk about the lateral and the medial muscles. The lateral muscle will form the ball of the little toe and the medial muscle will form the ball of the big toe. If we had to make an analogy between the upper limb and the lower limb, the lateral muscles could be associated with the hypothenar muscles, while the medial muscles could be associated with the thenar muscles. Lateral muscles are associated with movement of the little toe, while the medial muscles are associated with movement of the big toe or the hallux. Let's look at the lateral and medial muscles now. So as we notice, first muscle is abductor. We have the abductor digiti minimi and the abductor hallucis. Next, we have the flexor digiti minimi brevis and the flexor hallucis brevis. And finally, we have the muscles that do not match, which is the opponens digiti minimi and the adductor hallucis. So let's talk about the abductor muscles first. The abductor digiti minimi will originate on the calcaneal tuberosity as well as the plantar aponeurosis. The abductor hallucis also originates on the calcaneal tuberosity and the plantar aponeurosis. The abductor digiti minimi will insert on the proximal phalanx as well as the metatarsal bone of the digiti minimi. The abductor hallucis will only insert on the proximal phalanx of the hallux. Next, we'll talk about the flexor digiti minimi brevis and the flexor hallucis brevis. Flexor digiti minimi brevis is going to originate on the fifth metatarsal as well as the long plantar ligament, and insert onto the proximal phalanx. The flexor hallucis brevis will insert onto the proximal phalanx via the two sesamoid bones that are present within their tendons, but it will originate from a different site, which is the lateral cuneiform bone and the cuboid bone. If you want to know more about these bones, we have a video about the bones of the foot. You can check that out. Finally, we have the opponens digiti minimi and the adductor hallucis. Let's start with the opponens digiti minimi. The opponens digiti minimi, now if you recollect, the opponens muscle even in the thenar group would always oppose and would insert on the metatarsal bone of the respective finger. Therefore, here also opponens will insert on the metatarsal bone, unlike the others that insert on the proximal phalanx, whereas it will originate on the metatarsal bone itself and the long plantar ligament. Next, we have the adductor hallucis. Now, if you remember the adductor pollicis from the thenar musculature, the adductor pollicis also has two heads, a transverse head and an oblique head. Similarly, the adductor hallucis will also have two heads, a transverse head as well as an oblique head. The transverse head will originate on 3 to 5 metatarsal phalangeal joints and the deep transverse metatarsal ligaments, and the oblique head will originate on the 2nd to the 4th metatarsal bones. Oblique head is only 2nd to 4th metatarsal bones, which is one less from both the upper and lower limit of the metatarsal phalangeal joints, which is the origin site of the transverse head, and it will insert onto the proximal phalanx. So if you notice, all the muscles of the lateral and the medial group will insert onto the proximal phalanx except for the opponens digiti minimi, which always opposed just like in the upper limb, and it will insert on the metatarsal bone. So these were the plantar group of muscles. Let's move to the dorsal group now. On the dorsal side, we have just two muscles. One is the extensor digitorum brevis and the other is the extensor hallucis brevis. The extensor, if you notice their site of origin, both of them are going to originate on the calcaneus bone, while the extensor digitorum brevis is going to insert on the middle phalanges of 2 to 4 digits, and the extensor hallucis brevis, which is exclusively for the hallux, will insert on the proximal phalanx of the hallux. So these are our dorsal group of muscles. This is an overview of what we've covered in today's video. I hope this video is helpful. That's all we have for today. Thank you.